How to break free from the addiction to suffering. It's Kute Blackson here, nationally best-selling author of You Are the One and the Magic of Surrender. Make sure you hit the like button below to subscribe. In so many ways as human beings, we have all experienced suffering. We create problems that often aren't problems. We manufacture drama, challenges, problems, which only leads to anxiety and stress and frustration, pain, anger, suffering. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we constantly, as human beings, put ourselves in situations and experiences where we make ourselves suffering, when sometimes there's no real reason to suffer? Things seem to be going well, we sabotage it and blow it up. You're in a great relationship when you finally meet someone that wants to be with you and loves you, you blow it up. You're making money, there's abundance flowing, work is going well. You do something that seems to screw it up. Why do we do this to ourselves? Inside of us as human beings, there is a tendency that's often unconscious, an impulse that sometimes drives us to create stress and suffering for ourselves, drama for ourselves. This mechanism that does that is the ego. This ego. But what I will say, contrary to what others say, is ego is not the enemy. The more you make ego the enemy, the more you will suffer, the more there will be drama, the more there will be stress, because the ego in its very nature wants a fight. It is a root cause of all suffering. The ego wants you to fight it, wants you to try to annihilate it, get rid of it, because this fight and resistance to the ego gives ego the perceived sense of being alive, gives ego the perceived sense of existing. It's ego that resists and makes us suffering. But what we first have to understand is, when you understand the nature of something, ego, it changes your relationship with it. First, understand that ego isn't real. It's not a thing like a watch or a hand or a sweater. Ego is not a thing. It's a process. It's an activity of identification with oneself as mind, body, form, past history, trauma, conditioning, memories. The more we identify with ourselves as all those things, as me, the more we will suffer. And the job of the ego, the very job of the ego, is to reinforce its existence and to protect you and prevent you from getting hurt again like you were hurt when you were young. This is the very nature and job of the ego. So the ego tries to control everything because it feels like if it can control the world and the universe and the government and politics and the weather and how you perceive me and my feelings and emotions, your feelings and emotions, your children, your spouse, people around you, success, failure, manifestation, results, the ego feels that if it can control everything, then it won't get hurt again. Good intention. Very ineffective strategy, but the ego also feels as though if it can control everything, it won't get hurt. But control gives ego a sense of being something. Control gives the ego the sense of being a doer, like I'm the one that's doing, I'm in control. It's me that's making my life happen, which makes the ego feel like it actually exists because it's not real. So when you talk about letting go, when you talk about surrendering, that's terrifying for the ego, because the ego all of a sudden feels like I don't exist, I might die. And so when things flow, when grace flows, when abundance flows, when life is good, when you're in that zone and life is happening, things are happening through you, there's grace, there's ease, there's no struggle. Ego says, oh shoot, what now? And that's often unconsciously when ego kicks in, out of fear of not existing. It's the fear of not existing, the fear of perceived death, that triggers ego activity to kick into doing something, got to do something, got to be something, because if I do something, I'm real, but it's not. And that's often why it's sometimes so hard to let love in. It's sometimes so hard to let grace in, because ego wants to be the doer. It's often why we create resistance and suffering and difficulty for ourselves, because if I suffer and I'm doing and I'm working hard and I'm pushing hard and I'm struggling and striving, then not only do I feel a sense of validation and worth, but I feel a sense, ego feels a sense that I exist. This is why I say ego, or the perception that we are ego, and the belief that we are this ego creates our suffering. So realize that you are not ego. Ego is an activity and a process of identifying yourself as mind, body, form, thoughts, beliefs, stories. And when you realize that ego is not real, it's a process, and that you are not ego, it begins to change your relationship with it. Rather than fighting it, you can observe the process. You can observe the activity. Rather than trying to kill it, rather than trying to annihilate it, rather than trying to destroy it, which just keeps you in a fight, a gridlock fight, and gives ego something to do even more, which only creates more suffering. So instead, observe the process of the ways you are identifying. Observe it, observe ego, and in the observation of ego that you previously believed to be you, you begin to notice there's a space. In that space, you're not it. In that space, you are that which is observing. In that space is a moment of freedom. See, when you were a child, you were free. You incarnated in this human experience. You weren't so locked in ego. You weren't into suffering. You laughed for no reason. You ran naked and you didn't have the sense of, do you love me? You didn't feel like you had to work hard. You pooped. Your parents brought you food. You giggled. You felt the joy of the moment. You were free. No sense of egoness. But what happened is we met our parents and we learned all sorts of strategies, you see, to deal with our parents and life and pain and existence and experience and this human experience that is sometimes painful, that we learned to shut down, disconnect, not feel them. It developed all sorts of walls and masks and personas as a way to function, survive and cope and control our environment and the pain. And we also learned the way of being to go into the world, to contort ourselves into a shape. Who do I need to be in order to get love, validation, and approval from my mom, my dad, caretakers? And we held on to this version of ourselves that we actually believed ourselves to be, and we said, this is me, I am this, I'm just this way, I'm just independent. Because if I'm independent, I don't have to depend on anyone, and it won't hurt me if my needs aren't met. Ego. And so ego isn't bad. Ego is a set pattern that we learn to become with good intention. Ego is a program that we learn to run as a way to get love, validation, and approval. So ego isn't bad. It's just the vehicle that we developed in this human experience to function and survive. The truth is, everybody has ego. Ego isn't the issue. It's your relationship with ego that is the issue versus ego itself. Even Dalai Lama has an ego, because if you said, hey, Dalai Lama, he would turn around and say, yes, So ego isn't the issue, it's your relationship with yourself, your identification with yourself that is more the issue than ego itself. So when you notice your ego, when you notice your patterns, when you notice yourself resisting, when you notice yourself doing your limiting characters, when you notice yourself creating more suffering and stress and drama and struggle for yourself as a way to reinforce your existence and feel worthy, don't judge it, observe. It's an activity. Observe. Observe the ego and love it. Hold it. Breathe. Bring compassion to it because it means well. And when you can hold ego, you don't reinforce ego. When you can hold ego and love ego, when you can hold ego and just be with ego, the activity, the mechanism that is ego, that is fighting and fighting and fighting to control everything in the space of love, can begin to finally relax, soften, surrender, and melt away. You are not ego. Trust that it is safe for you to let go, and you are worthy just because you are, just because you exist. It's okay to receive, allow grace and ease in your life. Folks, if you enjoyed today's short video, make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel and go to my website, kuteblackson.com, enter your name and your email to receive a free 3-part video training series. Love now.